Imagine waking up tomorrow inside a steel city that stretches nearly 4 football fields from end to end, one that has not seen a port in 93 days, one that has no connection to any grocery supply chain, no municipal water authority, no sewage treatment plant, no hospital network, no power grid, no banking system, no internet service provider, and no possibility of calling for help if something breaks. And then imagine that 5,000 human beings are depending right now on the invisible architecture of daily routine, holding every single one of those systems together. And ask yourself a question that the title of this video demands you actually sit with. What is the hidden routine that keeps thousands of sailors functioning like one system, and why does it have to be hidden at all? That question is not rhetorical. It is engineering. The answer is not discipline, though discipline is present. It is not hierarchy, though hierarchy structures everything. The answer is constraint-based systems design applied to human biology at a scale that civilian life has never been required to solve. And the moment you understand that framing, the aircraft carrier stops looking like a warship and starts revealing itself as something far more precise. A fully engineered, blackout-proof, self-sustaining civilization that was built not to impress, but to survive indefinitely without the modern world. Begin with the most fundamental constraint. The ship does not plug in. There is no external power source beneath the ocean. There is no cable running from a reactor on shore. The Nimitz-class carrier generates approximately 194 megawatts of electrical power through 2 nuclear reactors, a figure that sounds clinical until you understand that a mid-sized American city, say a city of around 100,000 people, consumes roughly the same range of power, and the carrier does it with 0 external fuel supply for its reactors for periods measured in decades, not months. The reactor cores on these vessels are designed to last the operational life of the ship. They do not get refueled annually. They do not get swapped out during deployment. The thermal energy produced by controlled nuclear fission is converted through steam turbines into electricity that powers every system aboard, from catapults to air conditioning to the desalination plants that manufacture the ship's water supply from raw ocean. And this chain, reactor to steam to turbine to electricity to every living system aboard, must never break, because if the reactor goes dark, the pumps stop, and if the pumps stop, the water production stops, and if the water production stops, 5,000 people begin dehydrating inside a sealed steel structure in the middle of the ocean within a time frame that is not theoretical, it is biological. This is where civilian logic collapses. On land, water scarcity is a political or logistical problem. On a carrier at sea, it is a physics problem with a fixed countdown. The ship produces roughly 400,000 gallons of fresh water daily through reverse osmosis and distillation systems that pull seawater in, pressurize it through semi-permeable membranes, and expel potable water on the other side. That production number is not generous. It is calibrated. Every gallon is accounted for. Every department has a water allocation. Showers are short by design, not culture. The hidden routine that manages water is not one person tracking gauges. It is a daily behavioral system embedded across 5,000 people through scheduling, habit formation, mandatory procedure, and departmental accountability structures that run whether anyone is watching or not. If the desalination system develops a membrane failure during a period of high operational tempo, the reserve tanks provide a buffer measured in hours, not days, and the pressure on the engineering crew to isolate, diagnose, and restore does not come from command screaming. It comes from the silent arithmetic of 5,000 bodies consuming water faster than it is being replaced. That silence is louder than any alarm. Move now from water to the system that water feeds, which is food, and understand that the food system on a carrier is not a galley. It is an industrial supply chain compressed into the hull of a warship and run on a cycle that begins months before the ship ever leaves port. The carrier stores enough food to feed its crew for an extended deployment without resupply, meaning the logistics team must forecast caloric requirements, nutritional balance, shelf stability, storage space, and preparation capacity across every meal for every person across months of operations. The refrigeration systems that preserve this food draw from the same power grid as everything else aboard, which means a localized electrical fault in the wrong compartment can cascade into food spoilage at a scale that forces immediate menu restructuring. Increased consumption of shelf-stable rations, and a subtle but measurable shift in crew morale that the behavioral research on confined populations documents clearly. Food quality degradation in isolated environments does not produce dramatic collapse. It produces slow erosion of cooperative behavior, increased interpersonal friction, decreased cognitive performance during complex tasks, and a creeping psychological fatigue that is almost impossible to reverse mid-deployment without physical intervention. Here is what most people never consider. The cooks aboard a carrier are not simply preparing meals. They are managing one of the most powerful psychological stability levers on the ship. Routine meal times in a confined environment function as temporal anchors. They tell the brain what time it is in the absence of natural light cycles. They provide social structure in an environment that has no civilian social infrastructure, and they create micro moments of normalcy that compress psychological pressure into manageable windows. When that system degrades, when meals are delayed, when variety collapses, when the food tastes wrong for too many consecutive days, the hidden routine begins to fray, and the fraying is not visible in any single person. It is visible across 5,000 people simultaneously in the aggregate data of minor disciplinary incidents, sickbay visits, productivity metrics, and the subtle escalation of communication breakdowns between departments. The carrier's routine is designed to prevent that aggregate from ever reaching a tipping point, and it does so not through enforcement, but through engineering, by making the routine itself the path of least resistance for every person aboard. But this creates a new vulnerability, because a system that relies on routine for psychological stability is a system that is acutely sensitive to disruption of that routine. And the disruption that the carrier's designers spent the most time anticipating is not enemy action. It is medical emergency at scale. The ship's medical department operates as a full-service hospital inside a combat vessel, equipped with surgical suites, intensive care capacity, dental facilities, mental health services, and pharmaceutical inventories that must be projected months in advance because there is no pharmacy within reach. If an appendix ruptures on day 47 of a 90-day deployment, the surgery happens aboard. If a sailor develops a psychological break under the cumulative pressure of isolation, confined quarters, rotating 12-hour shifts, and months without natural daylight variation, the psychiatric intervention happens aboard. The medical team cannot transfer a critical patient to a trauma center. They cannot call a specialist in from outside. They are the specialist. The hidden routine that sustains medical readiness is a continuous system of preventive monitoring, physical fitness schedules, nutritional oversight, occupational health tracking, and psychological screening that is embedded so deeply into the carrier's operational tempo that most sailors experience it not as medical surveillance, but simply as the way things are done. If you lived here, you would not think of your mandatory physical fitness requirement as a health intervention. You would think of it as Tuesday. That normalization is not accidental. It is the product of behavioral system design that converts high-stakes medical necessity into unremarkable daily habit. Because the moment a health protocol feels like an intrusion, compliance degrades, and degraded compliance in a population of 5,000 people in a sealed environment produces compounding medical risk at a rate that the ship's medical capacity cannot absorb. And this is where the pressure intensifies, because the medical system, like the water system and the food system and the power system, is not independent. It draws from the same logistical reserve, the same power grid, the same human attention bandwidth that every other system is also drawing from simultaneously. The carrier is not a collection of parallel systems. It is a single integrated system wearing many faces, and the hidden routine is the protocol layer that keeps every face synchronized. Consider the waste management architecture, which is the system that civilian visitors to the carrier find most surprising, because it is the one that land-based infrastructure has made completely invisible in modern life. The carrier cannot dump raw sewage into international waters. The environmental regulations and the operational security implications of a waste trail are both prohibitive, so the ship operates a full waste treatment and processing system that manages biological waste, solid waste, hazardous material, and aviation fuel byproducts within the hull. Solid waste is incinerated in shipboard incinerators that must be operated within strict emissions protocols. Biological waste is processed through marine sanitation devices. Hazardous materials, including aviation fluids, cleaning chemicals, and maintenance compounds, are cataloged, stored, and managed under a regulatory framework that would be familiar to any industrial environmental compliance officer, except that the compliance officer here is a sailor in a compartment below the flight deck with no external agency to call if the system develops a problem. If the waste processing system develops a failure mode during high-tempo flight operations, which is also the period of highest crew density, highest food consumption, and highest biological waste generation, the engineering team must isolate the failure, manage the overflow with temporary containment, and restore capacity before the backup systems reach their limits, all while the flight operations above them continue because the operational mission does not pause for infrastructure maintenance. The pressure in that scenario does not come from the failure itself. It comes from the simultaneity, from the fact that every system that needs attention needs it at the same time, and the human beings who maintain these systems are themselves subject to the fatigue, cognitive load, and psychological pressure of the environment they are maintaining. This is the deepest structural tension in the carrier's design. The systems that sustain human performance are maintained by the humans whose performance they are sustaining, and when the humans are degraded by fatigue or stress, the maintenance quality degrades with them, which increases the risk of system failure, which increases the operational pressure, which further degrades the humans. The hidden routine exists to interrupt this feedback loop before it begins. The watch schedule, the rotating assignment of personnel to critical systems monitoring around the clock, is not merely an administrative structure. It is a biological intervention. By rotating personnel through standardized watch periods, the carrier distributes cognitive load across time. It prevents any single individual from accumulating the kind of sleep debt that produces catastrophic decision-making errors, and ensures that at any moment, the person with the freshest cognitive state is the one watching the most critical systems. The watch schedule is also a psychological pacing mechanism. In an environment with no natural day-night cue, the carrier's interior is lit to the same specification regardless of whether it is noon or midnight. The watch rotation provides the brain with a synthetic temporal structure that substitutes for the circadian anchors that civilian life takes entirely for granted. If you were here, your body would orient itself not to sunrise but to watch rotation. Your sense of morning would be calibrated not to light, but to the sound of the previous watch departing. Your concept of a day would compress and expand in ways that have been studied in detail by naval human factors researchers who spend their careers understanding exactly how long a human being can maintain high cognitive performance in a watch rotation before the compounding sleep disruption begins to produce the kind of subtle decision-making errors that are invisible in routine conditions but catastrophic in contingency conditions. The hidden routine manages this. It accounts for it. It builds in sleep protection protocols, mandatory rest periods, and fatigue monitoring systems precisely because the carrier cannot afford to find out what happens when it does not. But here is what the routine cannot fully account for, and this is the escalation that the last third of this analysis demands. The carrier's communications architecture. The ship can operate under conditions of communications blackout for extended periods. This capability is a deliberate design feature for operational security, but it produces a human environment that has no civilian analog. 5,000 people, cut off from the outside world, from their families, from news, from any external social reference point, managing critical infrastructure, performing technically demanding work, and doing so inside a community that is both their workplace and their entire social world simultaneously. The psychological literature on isolated and confined environments, from Antarctic research stations to submarine crews to long-duration spaceflight studies, consistently identifies the period around day 40 to 70 of isolation as the inflection point where interpersonal tensions that were manageable in the early weeks begin to solidify into more rigid conflict patterns, where individual psychological reserves begin to show their limits, where the social fabric of the community requires active maintenance to prevent the kind of fragmentation that reduces collective performance. The carrier's hidden routine addresses this not through counseling sessions or motivational interventions. Those are available, but they are not the primary mechanism. It addresses it through the structure of the work itself. By maintaining a continuous and demanding consequential routine that requires every person to depend on every other person for physical safety, the carrier creates a social adhesive that is more durable than voluntary cooperation. When the person monitoring the reactor cooling system knows that the person bringing them their watch relief is the same person whose laundry they share a washing machine with. The professional relationship and the social relationship are not separate. They are the same relationship, operating at two levels simultaneously, and the mutual dependence that underpins both is the carrier's most powerful social engineering achievement. The routine is the civilization. The schedule is the culture. The procedure is the community. And this brings the analysis to the question that the carrier's designers spent the most time with, and that this script must leave deliberately unresolved, because it is the question that extends beyond the scope of any single system analysis. If the carrier is a fully self-contained civilization engineered to function indefinitely without the modern world, then what happens to the human beings inside it when they return to the modern world, when the routine dissolves, when the mutual dependence evaporates, when the synthetic temporal structure gives way to the unstructured chaos of civilian time, and the systems that kept 5,000 people functioning as one organism simply stop? The carrier does not have an answer for that. Its engineering stops at the gangway. What happens to a civilization when it is no longer needed is a question that the architects of self-sustaining systems have never successfully answered. And the carrier, for all its precision, is no exception.